The Odin 2 Portal is the device that I took with me to Turkey. I've just come back now from a trip from another town, and it just got me thinking, on that trip I took my AYN 2S because I specifically wanted to play Quantum Break, which I can't play on the AYN Odin 2 Portal 2. So you can see, depending on your use case, you want to know whether you're going to spend all this money and it's actually going to be something you're going to use. So let's talk about traveling with the AYN Odin 2 Portal. So let's set some parameters for traveling. I love a bit of parameters. So firstly, portability. One of the key things that I set as a parameter when I was going to Turkey. Battery life. I needed a lot of battery life because I didn't know when my next charge was going to be. Versatility and gaming options. And so when I took this overseas with me, it went with a lot of planning. Like, I really thought about what I would be using this thing for. And realistically, I realized I'm not going to be playing a hell of a lot of games. I want to have something that's a long format game that I can play on the plane. And then when we are out and about traveling, I actually want to use the device for entertainment and possibly for work. And we'll leave that for the end. There's a little curveball I want to throw at the end of the video. And so, I've got this grip and I got these stick caps on the AYN 2 Portal. But if you want something customized, you can go to PCB Way. Now, I've done a bunch of mods with them. I recently made this with the help of a designer on Reddit named Andrea I. You can make custom buttons with them. You can make custom shells like I showed you. You can make custom grips. The opportunities are endless with PCB Way. They do custom PCBs, they do CNC machining, they do 3D printing. You can even 3D print in metal. They do a lot of things. And so if you are a tinkerer like I am, definitely check out PCB Way and try your next order of a good 3D print with them. So let's talk about portability now. Okay, the grip just recently arrived, and that's another story. Go check my live stream. I'm not super happy with the grip. A lot of people aren't complaining about the things I'm complaining about. It's not snug on the device. I didn't have the grip with me. And I would say for travel, without the grip is the way to go. Because as you can see, it's pretty streamlined. It's pretty, it's not very big. And so in my live stream, I said, why didn't they just make it with this bulge and everything? But now that I'm putting myself in the mindset of my trip to Turkey again, I'm realizing the reason I chose this is because they've got these slightly more inline triggers, and they've got the slightly more sort of understated bulge at the top here. And so that is a big factor. And then also I've upgraded these sticks, which protrude a little bit more, nicer for gaming, but the older sticks are lower profile and nicer for travel. And I do think that AYN perhaps put a bit of thought into this, because this can slot into my backpack quite easily. It's obviously, I'm wearing tracksuit pants today, so it actually is going to be pocketable. No, it's not. No, it's obviously not pocketable, but it is portable. And that was the thing. So it's portable with a massive screen. And so that was a big win. The next massive thing is battery life. And this thing it seems to go on forever. I never had what some people call battery charge anxiety or battery anxiety. This thing can go for 8 hours. It just keeps going. I think only on the second day of my trip, it would have to be the third day because it took almost 2 days to fly. So the third day was when I charged this. It really just lasts forever. And that is thanks to Android. And so we're going to talk about, in comparison to other devices. But thanks to the fact that this thing runs Android, we get a lot of battery life on the AYN Odin 2 Portal, which is unsurpassed. Steam Deck, Windows handhelds, they just cannot beat the battery life on this ARM-based Android handheld. And then versatility. This is the other thing that drew me to Android for my trip, is the fact that apart from not being able to use, I could have set Android up for using it for work. It's not really a work device, like doing my documents and things. But I wanted to be able to have some entertainment for my wife and I and have gaming. And this was great. But it does come with pitfalls. For instance, this can't play my Steam games. So I had to install an app called Game Hub, and That also comes with its own pitfalls because Game Hub apparently is a bit of a dodgy app. But yes, I managed to play Firewatch all the way through on my flights there and back again. So using Game Hub. The only downside is I can't keep my save states. It didn't register any of my cloud saves onto Steam. So according to Steam, I haven't finished Firewatch. So that is sad. So that's Versatility, where it can do a bunch of things kind of well. I remember when the Mercedes-Benz B-Class came out, they said it was trying to sit on too many chairs, trying to do too many things at once, and ended up being a shitty car. I don't think this is a shitty device, but it is trying to sit on a lot of chairs, and some of them it's not doing very well. And that brings me on to gaming options. Now, as an emulation handheld, this is an absolute beast. For instance, if you are a Switch user, but you don't want to take your Switch with you because it can't do other things, you can emulate your Switch games on here and then do the other things on here as well while you're traveling, instead of bringing your Switch plus a laptop and all sorts of things. So that's where this becomes very, very versatile and gives you lots of gaming options. For instance, your Switch emulation, PS2 emulation, GameCube emulation, the Win Later and Game Hub, Windows game, Steam game emulation. There's a lot to be done on here in terms of gaming. You can also do your cloud-based gaming like Game Pass. You can do your cloud-based gaming on here. So a lot of versatility goes into Android. But let's talk about Game Hub / Win Later for a second now. Now, I'm a huge supporter of the whole concept of Steam on Android. I just think technically it's Steam on ARM-based chips, but I do feel like Android as a back end just feels like a very stable, very good battery optimized, and it gives you so much versatility on the back end so that you can run Steam, but you can do other things. And the app-based ecosystem of Android, it's really, really nice. So I'm personally really hoping that eventually we get something official from Valve, or for instance like that Game Hub, we get clarity that it's not super dodgy and that we can use it safely and that we can get our cloud saves and all that sort of thing. Something official and proper that we can play our Steam games on and that can maximize the power of our handhelds. That would be great. But don't buy this with the promise of that. Don't buy this with the promise of this fringe thing of being able to play your Steam games on here, because it isn't great. I haven't tested the cloud-based gaming from Game Pass, but that is something to look into with a handheld like this. If you are using Game Pass, you might get away with cloud-based gaming when you travel and then streaming your games to this when you're in your home with Game Pass and via your Xbox and all that. So that is also a little ecosystem that I haven't personally researched, which I think this could be very useful for. Now, in terms of travel, let's talk about Android versus SteamOS. Now, SteamOS is really nice. It's Linux-based. Now, a lot of my friends are going to argue with me about this, but Linux is still a fringe operating system. I use a Windows laptop every single day of my life. Some people use Mac, but Linux is still tricky to navigate. PewDiePie recently released a video saying, he's moved over to Linux and it's so great to use and it's so customizable and all these things. And a lot of the selling points that he was dropping in that video are not things that I think the end user are super excited about. I think the end user wants something that's compatible with everything and is just going to work every single day of their lives. Now, Windows doesn't really work every single day of your life, but it is compatible with everything. And then Mac, the compatibility can sometimes be an issue, but you open it, close it, it's ready to roll, Whereas Linux, like for instance, a simple thing of installing certain apps, you've got to get repositories and all this sort of thing, and it gets very confusing. And there's a huge learning curve to getting into Linux, and that's what SteamOS presents. So if you're traveling and you want to use SteamOS for other things rather than gaming, you're kind of stuck unless you get really into learning how to use Linux. Now, with Android, it's the app-based economy, the app-based ecosystem that so many people are used to. If you have an Android phone, using this for all of your things, it's all there. And so that is a very big selling point of using Android rather than taking your Steam Deck on a trip with you. I can put my Lightroom on here for my photo editing. I can't do that on Linux. I can do my video editing on here and kind of do that on Linux. And I can do this on Linux, but it's so easy just to open Netflix and watch a movie on here as opposed to, you doing that on Linux. You can do it, but what I'm saying is the draw card, the ease of use of Android is really strong. So that will depend on your use case and what you are wanting to get out of your device when you're traveling. But for me, having that app-based ecosystem was really nice to have while I was on my trip. Okay, so here is the argument that I left out of the picture, in this video and just for myself when considering a device for travel. Now, the massive downside of using a Windows handheld is the battery anxiety. Constantly wondering if it's going to die on you. For instance, my flight to Turkey was very, very long, and I don't think the AYN Neo, even if I dropped the TDP really low for Firewatch, I don't think it would have lasted as long as this. It definitely wouldn't have lasted 3 days, not a chance in hell. So with the Windows handheld, I would have had to bring a massive battery pack to keep things going. And it would have had to have been a PD charging, like a high powered PD charging battery pack to keep that AYN Neo 2S, the Windows-based handheld, going. However, here is the big kicker. Like, if you are looking for something to travel with and you're specifically looking to play like a Steam game, if you're wanting to play a lot of Steam games that, let's say for instance, that you're just going to get bored of a retro game or whatever on a handheld, and you want to have a story-based game that you want to play via Steam or whatever. Windows, it's the problem with Windows, and it's the wonder of Windows, is that it's so compatible with everything, and it's something that we use every day, and it runs a lot of the apps that we use professionally. So I could have taken the AYN Neo, dropped the TDP, played Firewatch on the plane, still watched my Netflix with my wife when we were traveling, and then still been able to do work like run my Lightroom, run my video editor. If I wanted to do my entire YouTube channel overseas, I could have done that on a Windows-based handheld, and I could not have done that on an Android handheld, with a lot of caveats. I could have done it, but a lot of caveats. And the same thing with a Linux-based handheld. There would have been a lot of workarounds to do that specific thing of going away and knowing that I could do everything I want to do on my handheld. Now, this is an argument for, only taking one device and then, leaving your laptop at home. Obviously, if you bring your laptop, it's a different story. If you want to take one device to do all of the things, the curveball of this video is that Windows is kind of the answer. I hate to say that because, I've been thinking about how terrible Windows is in so many respects. But when it comes to a handheld, here's the problem. I don't think we're ever going to reach a place where a Windows-based handheld has got good battery efficiency, a good sleep mode, and runs everything perfectly. And we're never going to be there. We're never going to get that. However, if you're wanting something that sits on all the chairs, like the Mercedes B-Class, and sits on all the chairs and is a shitty operating system, but does everything quite decently, a Windows handheld is the way to go. The biggest problem there is going to be battery life.